Ethical conflict of vaccination mandates. General background of vaccine mandates. In 1796, Edward Jenner kicked off the vaccine era, preventing the spread of smallpox with the use of a similar virus, less damaging, cowpox. The next vaccine would not be introduced for a long time, although it did spark a boom in the medical scene. The recent COVID-19 pandemic was a huge cause for concern and started vaccine mandates across the United States, from as early as 2020 to 2023 when the mandates were mostly removed. These mandates were put into place to slow the spread of many branches of the virus, preventing the deaths of many. Before mandate removal, several groups began protest, painting the mandates to be immoral and restrictive, starting a mass of questioning authority from those who despised the mandates. A vaccine is, quote, a substance used to stimulate immunity to a particular infectious disease or pathogen, typically using a zombified version of the alive virus or a stem that is similar but less damaging. Key favorable arguments for the mandates are as follows. It reduces rapid spread of virus among high population areas. It also reduces casualties among high-risk populations, that including elderly and terminally ill, and children that are at high risk. Students could also be protected from spread if school mandates are put into place. Quote, during COVID-19, widespread administration in adults has quickly generated a large evidence base supporting the vaccine's safety, including evidence from active surveillance studies. Expert in vaccine mandate promotion. Nancy Cass, a professor in health policy and management, has a strong stance on the mandate of vaccines. Her argument states that mandates aren't necessary in the beginning stages of a viral pandemic. This stage only comes into play later, quote, in Plan A, unquote, in her words. Is education. Plan A is education. The next step, if that informative stage isn't effective incentive to support the use of vaccines across the population, then mandates begin to be necessary for the well-being of the people. Her main argument is centered around the steps before mandates, although mandates are necessary in other cases, as stated in the article. Implementing the mandates too early could lead to eliminate voluntary response to vaccination, or people's willingness to cooperate with the government if mandates are placed too quickly. Cass argues that if the virus is a large enough public health issue, then mandates become, quote, an important tool, quote, coming from her stance as a professor in health policy. The key disagreeable arguments are as follows. Quote, mandatory vaccination violates informed consent because the consent is not voluntary, making it unethical. Mandatory vaccinations are coercive and thus unethical. Quote, vaccination mandates violate the Nuremberg Code because COVID-19 vaccines are, quote, experimental, unquote, and because mandates undermine the voluntariness of informed consent, unquote. The Nuremberg Code is a set of principles for ethics of human experimentation delineated in the 1947 Nazi doctor case of the United States versus Branded. Mandatory restrictions are unethical because they impose restrictions on those who are unwilling to be vaccinated, making them discriminatory. Experts in vaccine mandate removal. An expert in vaccine mandate removal would be Dr. Martin Kulldorff. who worked for Harvard University as a professor of medicine since 2003. He was recently fired from his position at Harvard-affiliated Mass General Brigham Hospital due to his opposition to COVID restrictions and vaccine mandates. His argument for the restriction of mandates was centered around his goal to have more focused mandates, leaving the younger and middle-aged populations out of the mandates. In the declaration he co-authored, the, quote, Great Barrington Declaration, unquote, he argues to, quote, protect the elderly while letting children and young adults live close to normal lives, unquote. While not a complete removal, Koldorf still resented the idea of completely mandating vaccines across the population. The least ethically persuasive argument has to be the argument against vaccination mandates. Although there is several cases where it may seem like mandates are immoral or restrictive, removing basic freedoms, the ethical issue of, quote, greater good comes into play. A greater good is involved with the decision to enact a mandate. Weighing the strengths and weaknesses, it is seen that vaccines prevent much more death than in their absence. That is why it can be argued that opposing the mandates is not very ethically persuasive. Since the greater good is to enact those mandates, preventing widespread death at the cost of some civil liberties, prioritizing the welfare of the majority. In a population where the majority decides what's right and what's wrong, those who are dying and those who are sickly would rather have a vaccination, and the minority who oppose vaccinations are not part of the greater good, and therefore are undermined. Most ethically persuasive argument is for vaccine mandates. While some may argue that the mandates are a direct conflict of interest when dealing with the freedoms of America, mandates can still be entirely necessary. Sometimes a settlement must be reached to protect the population and its susceptibility to a viral pandemic. While there was much protest over the discriminatory aspect of vaccine mandates, so many more arguments have been made in promotion of these mandates. For example, the saving of several sickly populations, the saving of the elderly who are immunocompromised, and others that fit that description. While there was much protest over the discriminatory aspect of vaccine mandates, the passion of protest may have blinded those who seek purely freedom from government interaction with public concerns. The safety of the public population and the prevention of mass death is an ethically sound reason to enact mandates. While the government may not want to be involved in every public action, when it comes to the greater good, as stated in the previous slide, sometimes government action is necessary, conflicting with the decision of the minority in order to maintain the well-being of the majority. My personal ethical position on this vaccine mandate is in favor of the vaccine mandates. While in a perfect world, everyone would agree that a stance against mandates is futile. That is not the case in modern society, with everybody having conflicting ideals and different reasons. In my case, I feel that I agree with Professor Nancy Cass, previously mentioned in support of mandates. I agree that mandates must be used sparingly, not as a knee-jerk reaction to a pandemic. When an educational method is lacking, as in informing the public of the many benefits of vaccination, explaining before mandating. That is the only time when mandates are understandable, when the population does not understand the helpfulness of a vaccine and does not understand. Only when a population is being destroyed by its own pride is a mandate needed. By pride, I mean an unwillingness to understand and an unwillingness to use vaccines because of the many stipulations that are not further proven. I believe that mandates are almost never necessary for healthy, intelligent individuals that make smart choices. But sadly, that cannot be said in this current population. It can be said that government intervention is not always necessary, and it is corrupt or discriminatory. While this is true in some cases, in the case of a declining sickly population, emergency action must be taken for the greater good. It is an ethical responsibility for the government to intervene when a mandate is necessary to save the thousands of those that are sick or at risk by vaccinating the few that reject it and all of those that accept it. Works cited page.